Welcome to this tutorial video, and in today's class we'll be looking at one of the most interesting systems that you find in human anatomy, and that is what we're calling the muscular system. So as you can see, there's this particular individual here which is basically trying to depict what these muscles we're going to talk about are all about. So before we even begin, I'll remind you that subscribe to this YouTube channel in case you haven't, so that you're updated on the more upcoming videos that we're going to be posting on this particular channel. Alright, so to start with, I know that most of you have been told or heard that this particular system is very complex, but you must know that this system is not very complex as people mention or talk about it. It's one of the most interesting systems in human anatomy. Why? Because you would wonder why or how things would be if at all a human being did not have these particular muscles. So it's very important, especially if you're in the medical field, that you grasp certain concepts that you must really understand or put into consideration on this particular system. It's very important. Okay, so let's start and see what we must know or cover on this particular system. Now, to start with, you can see that I'm just showing you pictures that are depicting these particular muscles that we're going to be talking about throughout this session. Okay, so you can see that there's this particular individual here, and these are just examples of the muscles that we're going to cover. Okay, they are muscles that are surrounding different bones, different internal organs. Okay, so these particular muscles are very important because you can see that they're the ones that are covering most of the vital internal organs that you can see here. All right, then on this particular end, okay, so you can see that there's this particular skeletal part, okay, of a human being. There's a skeletal system there, and this picture was purposefully chosen because I just wanted you to appreciate the fact that you've got muscles here, okay, you've got muscles here that are covering or surrounding the skeletal system. In other books, they like combining these two different systems. You find that they'll be teaching about the muscles, at the same time they'll also be teaching about the skeletal system, which they call the muscular skeletal system. But in this particular video, we will just focus on how these different muscles that we have as human beings function. Okay, so just to appreciate, you can see that these particular muscles, they are the ones that are covering this particular skeletal system. So you'd imagine how a human being would be if at all these particular muscles were not there. Okay, so that's what I just wanted you to take note of here. Now, in the introduction of this particular session, we're saying that the muscular system is a vital component of human anatomy, which is responsible for producing movement, maintaining body posture, and supporting essential bodily functions. So this particular muscular system is very important. Why? Because it helps human beings to be able to produce movement, to maintain body posture, for you to stand in a certain position or for you to sit in a certain way for a long time. Just know that muscles at that particular point, they are playing a role in you being able to maintain their body posture. Apart from that, these particular muscles, they are involved in various bodily functions that I'm going to cover in this particular session. All right, so we are also reminding you to say these particular muscles, they are composed of three main types. So if you talk about the muscular system, I know that most of you mostly you just focus on the skeletal system. Muscles that cover the skeletal system. Those are the ones that you're usually interested in, which we call the skeletal muscles. But you must know that there are other different types of muscles besides the skeletal muscles. For example, we've got the skeletal muscles themselves, which are the ones that are just covering the skeletal system. Apart from that, we've got what we call, so when I say skeletal muscles, I'm trying to talk about these muscles that are covering these different bones or these different components of the skeletal system. But besides that, it's important for a student that is, having this course of human anatomy to understand that there are also what we call smooth muscles. They are also what we call smooth muscles. So basically, Smooth muscles, they are found in these particular muscles, they line internal organs. All right, they line internal organs. For example, you've got the digestive system. Okay, that GIT has got what we call smooth muscles that promotes what we call peristalsis movement. Okay, that's just an example of a smooth muscle. Apart from that, there are also what we call cardiac muscles. Just from the word cardiac, it's telling you that these are types of muscles that make up what we call the myocardium, the muscle layer of the heart. Remember, the heart beats, right? It's able to contract, it's able to relax, and for it to be able to do so, it has what we call the cardiac muscles. So recap on this particular slide is that this muscular system is a vital component of human anatomy. Why? Because it helps us to be able to provide movement and maintain posture, as well as performing various bodily functions, of which we're going to cover in this particular session. And it's also important for you to know that besides the common skeletal muscles that you know, there are also what we call smooth muscles and cardiac muscles. All right? So we're saying that these particular muscles, they coordinate with the nervous system to enable voluntary action such as what? Walking. Okay? So, for example, you must know that as these different muscles are performing various functions, they are what we call voluntary actions that these muscles perform, and there are those that are involuntary. Okay? So, for example, if you want to walk, you always decide that you want to walk, right? You'll be able to make a step, you extend your muscles, you flex them. Those kind of actions are voluntary. But it's also important for you to understand the fact that this particular muscular system doesn't just work on its own. The nervous system is involved. This is why you find that for people who are injured, okay, or for people whose nerves have been injured or damaged, their muscles will not be able to move because they don't have nerve supply. Their muscles, they are not innervated, or they're not supplied by nerves. So you find that there are parts of this particular skeletal system or muscular system that are going to be working voluntarily, okay, with your will, or those that will be working involuntarily. For example, you're saying that involuntary process such as what? Digestion and heartbeat. So when you eat something, right? You eat something, you swallow it. There's a certain point if you swallow something in which you will not be able to control what will happen to that particular thing or food you swallowed. So that kind of action you are going to call it involuntary what? Process. Even your heart, when your heart is beating, you don't tell it to say stop now or continue. The way you can move your leg and stop it. So you find that those kind of muscles you find in the heart, the cardiac muscles, they are under what we call involuntary what? Processes. Why? Because you can't control them. Okay? So we are saying that beyond movement, so beyond the fact that these muscles are involved in performing, body movements and locomotion, these muscles, they also help in what we call body temperature. They regulate body temperature. I'm going to explain why very soon. Apart from that, these particular muscles, they also protect the internal organs. Okay? For example, I talked about the GIT, which is surrounded by what we call smooth muscles. So those particular muscles, they also help in protecting these various internal organs. There are a lot of them that we're going to talk about. So we are saying that these particular muscles, the fact that they are involved in these various bodily functions, they are very what? Indispensable, meaning they are very, very vital. Their functions, they are beyond something that you can explain. They are very, very vital to what? To human health or overall health. Okay? Now, the general objective of this particular session or class, I just want you people that are watching this particular video to be able to acquire knowledge on this particular muscular system, because it's very, very important, like we've been seeing from the introduction. Okay? Now, to start with, before we even start talking about various components or various types of muscles from the face to the abdomen and other different areas, I just want you to generally have an idea of what muscles play. Of what muscles do in the human body. What are the functions? What are the roles of these particular muscles? Or in short, what are the functions of the muscular system? The first one, you know it, right? Movement. So these particular muscles, they are involved in movement. For you to move, for example, we're saying that there's what we call both voluntary and involuntary. So when we say movement, we simply mean that these particular muscles will be able to make a course of action that will enable things to move. For example, if you want to move your leg, it will be your muscles that will be involved in you moving your legs or walking. But as I mentioned earlier to say, there are certain actions in the body in which they are what we call involuntary muscles. For example, for you to be able to perform peristalsis movement in your GIT, those muscles, those smooth muscles, they are not under voluntary control. You cannot control them. So this movement in the GIT, for example, peristalsis, it will be there even without your will. No wonder we're calling it involuntary movement. Apart from that, muscles, they also help in what we call maintaining body posture. So, for example, if you sit on a sofa, very comfortable, you're watching your TV, you find that you even position yourself in a certain way. Just know that at that particular point of time, muscles are in action to be able to maintain that bodily posture that you've made. Okay? These particular muscles, they're also involved in what we call guarding entrances and exit of the body. So these are things that are usually called sphincters in human anatomy. For example, in the GIT, okay, you find that along the exit part of the GIT, there's what we call the rectum. So for it to be able to be controlled in terms of it being closed and open, there are sphincter muscles that are facilitate that particular mechanism. Even if when you want to void or urinate, you find that there are sphincter muscles that help you to be able to control when you want to start, when you want to void, and when you don't, you want to stop to void or urinate. There are sphincter muscles that are involved. Wanda was saying that they help in what we call guarding the entrances and exits of various parts of the human body. Apart from that, these muscles, they also help in what we call maintaining body temperature. Have you ever wondered why you start sweating when you are running or exercising? It's because your muscles, they're always active. They are always performing metabolic processes, such as what we call is what we call glycolysis. So in glycolysis, you know that these particular muscles or myofibrils, they will be able to break down glucose, okay, and they'll be producing ATP. Now, that ATP, when metabolized or when utilized by these particular muscles, the end product they produce is what we call heat energy. That's why I find that the more you run or exercise, the more your muscles will be able to generate heat from that ATP that you're utilizing. So the more you run, the more you exercise, these particular muscles, they'll be what? Generating heat. And why are we saying they maintain body temperature? Because when you are running and exercising and you're generating heat, what do? You sweat. After you sweat, the body cools down and then body temperature in the body is maintained. So these particular muscles, they also help in that. Apart from that, it's also important for a student that is studying this particular course, human anatomy, to also appreciate that these particular muscles, they are also involved in what we call circulation. So circulation, this is a component that you find in the cardiovascular system. Now, when we say these particular muscles are involved in circulation, what do we mean? For example, I mentioned that we've got what we call cardiac muscles, those that are found in the cardiovascular system on the heart. Okay, they pump blood. The cardiac muscles, specifically the myocardium layer of the heart, it pumps blood. So it's safe for you to say that these particular muscles, they are also involved in what we call circulation. And then apart from that, they are what we call smooth muscles in the blood vessels, which help to what? Regulate body temperature. If you are my student under SP Academy, you will know that I talked about the different layers of blood vessels. We've got the tunica media, the tunica intima, the tunica externa, and in one of these layers, okay, in the tunica media, we talked about these particular muscles having smooth muscle around them. And those muscles, they contract and relax, and that, by the virtue of them doing that, they are involved in blood pressure regulation. So these muscles are also involved in that. Apart from that, respiration. I recently taught you about the respiratory system. What did we say? We talked about the diaphragm, okay? Because the diaphragm does contract and relax depending on whether you are inhaling or exhaling air. So these particular muscles, such as the diaphragm muscle, okay, it's a skeletal muscle that helps or contracts to allow what? Breathing. Okay, so it's important for you to also appreciate that component. Okay, apart from that, in the digestion, smooth muscles in the digestive tract, they move food along what we call peristalsis movement. So as food is moving down the GIT, it's the muscles that are contracting involuntarily to be able to push that food down the GIT into the stomach and various components of this digestive system. So basically, that's just what I wanted you to know on the functions of the muscles. I think now you've got an idea of what these muscles do, whether skeletal, cardiac, or these different smoothie muscles. Okay. Apart from that, it's also important for you to know the properties of the muscles. What are these different features or properties of muscles? It's very, very important. So, the way these muscles are, one of the most important, properties, what we call irritability. So, I believe when you are doing your biology in secondary schools, you learned about the features or properties of living organisms, and one of them was what we call irritability. Simply means that a human being or an organism is able to respond to stimuli. So just like that, even these muscles, they are irritable. What it means is that they respond to external stimuli. For example, there's what we call electrical excitability. You people learned about the muscle contraction coupling mechanism, in which muscles are able to contract when they receive signals from the neurons or nerves. Okay, you looked at the neuromuscular junction, how the nerves will be able to initiate, muscle contraction mechanism after action potential and everything. So these muscles, they respond to what? Electrical stimulation from nerve impulses. Simply means that they are irritable. They have got what we call irritability, meaning they can respond to stimuli or external stimuli. Okay? Apart from that, muscles have got a property of what? Contractility. For you to be able to move, okay, it simply means there's an action of you contracting and relaxing your muscles. So it simply means that these muscles are able to contract, and it's that contraction action that brings about what? Movement. For example, muscles respond to stimuli by contracting or shortening. If you touch something, let's say if it's hot, and then you touch it, you'll be able to what? You'll be able to flex your hand away from that hot thing, and your muscles are going to contract, enabling you to be able to make that movement by contracting or shortening. So one of the properties of the muscles, besides irritability, is what we call contractility. Apart from that, if muscles can contract, it simply means what? They can also extend, right? So these particular muscles, they also perform what we call extensibility. They are capable of being stretched beyond their original length. So they're able to be, they can be extended. Okay? You're able to stretch them, okay? And then that particular property of you being able to stretch your muscles beyond their limit is what we call extensibility. Apart from that, last but not the least, there's what we call elasticity. So these muscles are elastic, from the term elastic. Okay, I believe when you were young, you are playing with elastic, and you see how it used to do when you kind of stretch it. Okay, you stretch it too much. What the elastic will do, that you're going to stretch it, it's going to increase in terms of length, and then when you let go, it goes back to normal, to the original length. Even these particular muscles, they do the same. Okay, for example, muscle fibers. When we say muscle fibers, we're just talking about muscle cells. Okay, muscle fibers, after being stretched, they have the tendency to recoil. If you like physics, you know what it means, to just go back to the individual distance that was initially there. So these particular muscles, after being stretched, they have the tendency to recoil uh, to their original length or resting length. So these muscles, they can be extended, yes, but after whatsoever is making them to extend is over, they'll be able to recoil back to their what? Initial length. So these are some of the properties that these particular muscles exhibit. One, irritability. They're able to respond to stimuli. They're able to contract, and we're calling that contractility. They're able to extend. Okay, they're able to be. They can be stretched. All right, and last but not the least, there's also what we call elasticity. So those are the properties of muscles. It's also important for you to understand the organization of skeletal muscles. Now, I must make mention that as we run through the entire topic of the muscular system, um, especially for my students, SPS students, I will generally focus more or much more on the skeletal muscles because that's what we want you to understand based on the curriculum as we talk about or refer to this particular system. All right? So, talking about the organization of muscles, yes, we're talking about muscles, but at your level, okay, as people who are studying degree related programs, you must know to say, yes, this is the muscle, yes, which is contracting, relaxing, and doing different things. But how is it organized? What is it made of? That's what we're talking about, the organization of this particular skeletal muscles. Now, to start with, I'll just start with my simple structure there, which we call a tendon. Remember, a tendon, this is simply a type of connective tissue that basically connects a muscle to a bone. We call it a tendon. Bone to bone, we call it a ligament. But in this particular case, we're just talking about a tendon. You can see that there's this bone that is here. Okay, you saw in one of the first slides, I showed you that these particular muscles are covering what? Bones. And the reason why these muscles are covering bones, remember you learned in the skeletal system that that particular locomotor system is involved in movement. And what is bringing about movement are these particular muscles. So muscles and bones hand in hand. Now, coming back to this particular concept, there's this tendon that is connecting this muscle, okay, muscle belly to this particular bone. So that is a tendon. Now, what I want you to appreciate on this particular slide is that these particular muscles that you are seeing, or this particular muscle, the entire muscle that you are seeing, has got different layers of connective tissue. Okay, it has got different layers of connective tissue. Okay, to start with, there's before I even talk about this, let me just show you what we call the fascia. This particular layer. Inside is a muscle. Okay, inside this is a muscle. Then outside there's what we call a fascia. So a fascia is more like imagine like you get something you put in a plastic bag. Okay, so it's like a plastic bag that is holding a muscle inside. We call it a fascia. It simply attaches this particular muscle to the skin. Okay, so we call it a fascia. Now, if we go inside and look at the structure of a muscle, so this particular muscle is made up of three special layers. Three special layers before we even talk about the actual muscle cell. And those layers, among them, the outermost we call it the epimysium. The epimysium. So this first layer of the muscle, this first thick layer of the muscle, we call it the epimysium. The epimysium. I will explain how the entire mechanism works when you're talking about how is the epimysium involved, how is this endomysium involved, and how is this perimysium involved. I'll talk about those things. So, away from the epimysium, remember I said that the epimysium is the outermost part of this particular muscle. So from the epimysium, you move to what we call the perimysium. Now, interestingly, you can see that there's this big part that is showing the entire muscle, right? And the outermost layer, we said it's what? The epimysium. Now, inside this big sac-like structure, there are these small bundles of muscles. We call them fascicles. We call them muscle fascicle. Now, it's important for you to know that each particular fascicle collectively is surrounded by what we call perimysium layer. It's also a type of connective tissue. It's a connective tissue structure. So if this is the entire bundle of these particular individual muscles inside, just know that what surrounds them or what puts them together, it's what we call the perimysium. So the first outermost layer was what? The epimysium. Then we went to look at what we call the perimysium. So this entire band of muscles is surrounded by what we call the perimysium. Now, let's assume that we just pull one of the muscle fibers there inside this particular fascicle. This is what we're pulling inside. So just imagine that we just maybe pick this particular piece of a muscle, we pull it and look at its structure. Okay? So, in short, we're just focusing on what we call a fascicle. Remember we said that the entire band of muscle is called a fascicle. And this fascicle is wrapped by what we call the perimysium. So this is what I was talking about. This is the perimysium layer of connective tissue that is covering or surrounding the entire bundle of muscle, which we call a fascicle. Now, inside this again, there is the individual muscle fiber or myofiber, which we call a muscle cell. So if they say muscle fiber, a muscle cell, it's one and the same. So inside this particular bundle or fascicle of muscles, they are now individual muscle cells. Okay, they are now individual muscle cells. So what is surrounding each individual muscle cell? We call it the endomysium. The endomysium. This is the protective connective tissue that is covering the individual muscle cell. So we've seen how we've moved from the outermost layer, which we are calling the epimysium, the outer layer. From the outer layer, we go to what we call the perimysium, which is covering the entire fascicle or band of muscles. Then you go inside now, which you are going to find the actual myofiber or the actual muscle fiber, which is covered by what we call the endomysium. Students, this is very, very important for you to understand. Why? Because when a muscle is contracting, that contracting mechanism, what happens is this. It starts from the, because remember, as you are looking at the muscle contraction mechanism, you are talking about this particular myofiber having what we call sarcomere, okay, where those action potentials that you learned in physiology take place. So the force, when the force is initiated, it starts from the actual muscle fiber here. So this actual muscle fiber is going to spread the force to the entire fascicle or the band of muscle. The entire fascicle is going to spread the force to the entire muscle. And then this entire muscle now will transfer the force to the tendon, and then this tendon will be able to pull the bone, and then you'll be able to make a movement. What I simply mean is that these different layers of muscles, such as the epimysium, endomysium, and perimysium, they just pull on each other to be able to initiate or facilitate movement. That's what happens there. Okay? So just to give you a written, theory of what I was talking about, is that the endomysium, this is the outer covering of individual muscle fibers that supports capillaries and what nerve endings. Remember, I said in the introduction that this particular muscular system works hand in hand with what? With the nervous system. So it's just that on this particular picture, we're not showing the actual nerves, but you must know that these different muscles, they are innervated. By innervated, we mean they are supplied by various nerves. So this endomysium, the innermost layer, we say that it's the one that is covering the individual muscle, which is supporting capillaries and what? Nerve endings. Why am I talking about capillaries? Of course, these muscles are also working. They are also organs, right? They must be supplied with blood. Okay? So you find that this particular endomysium is also supporting the capillaries and nerve endings that are embedded in these particular muscles. Then the perimysium there, this one binds the group of muscles. Okay, remember I said the perimysium is the one that is surrounding the what we call the band of muscles, what we call the fascicle. Okay, binds the group of muscles together into bundles called the fasciculi. It supports the nerve and the blood vessels, just like I explained. Then the epimysium, this covers the muscle belly. Remember I said this is one that is covering the outermost part of muscles. Okay, and it's part of a tendon because you can see here, it's from the epimysium that this particular is transitioning into what? A tendon. Okay, then there's also what we call fascia, a fibrous connective tissue that covers the muscle and attaches it to the skin. This, I talked about this particular fascia that is covering, it's more like a plastic that is encasing the entire muscle and connecting it or attaching it to what? To the skin. Okay, those are the layers that I needed my students to be able to what? To understand and know. Apart from that, let's quickly move on and look at what we call attachment of skeletal muscles. Remember I said that we'll basically talk about these skeletal muscles throughout this session. All right. So there's also what we call origin and insertion. Origin and what? Insertion. These are very, very vital terms that you must know, especially before your exams. You must know what we mean when we talk about origin in the muscles. Not origin of where people came from. No. In this particular case, we're talking about origin of muscles and insertion. Don't worry, these are very, very basic concepts. So to start with, as we talk about origin, what I want you to know is that, remember, as a human being, when you're moving, you're walking, you are doing different things, there are certain parts of your body, components that move as you are walking and doing different things, but there are certain parts, in as much as you are doing different things, they're just constant, they're not moving. Okay? So those different parts of the body that do not move as you are flexing or extending your different areas of muscles, okay, we call it the origin. So the origin is the immovable end of the muscle. That part of the muscle that does not move, we call it the origin. Just know that in as much as this particular origin is there, this part of muscle is not moving, there's an action that is being made there. I'm going to show you very soon. But I just want you to know for now that the end point of the muscle that is not moving, or the immovable end, we call it the origin. Then the movable end is called the insertion. So that part of the muscle that will be able to move, we call it the insertion. Then there are what we call tendons, connective tissue that attaches the muscles to bone. Okay? Don't confuse the tendons with ligaments. Ligaments, they attach bone to bone. Tendons, they attach a muscle to bone. Then there's also what we call an aponeurosis. An aponeurosis. Now, this is going to make much more sense as I describe what we call abdominal muscles. Okay? They are basically a sheet of tendons. Okay? Like, I'm sure you know what we call roof sheets. Those iron sheets that they put on covering different houses. Okay, you can think of them like this. A tendon, let me give an example. A tendon is a rope-like structure of connective tissue. Okay, this is a tendon. But if we're talking about an aponeurosis, it's like you've got a lot of tendons that are attached together, packaged together, and then they act more like a sheet. Okay, so we call it a sheet-like tendon structure. It's a flattened sheet-like tendon. So that's what we call an aponeurosis. There are a lot of them. I know you can have challenges in knowing them, but I'm going to remind you as we talk about individual muscles to say, this is what I meant when I said an aponeurosis. Okay, so those are the things that I wanted you to know here. Just looking at this in a picture way, remember I talked about insertion and origin. So let's take, for example, I believe my students know that this is the scapula, okay, the flat bone, right? This is the humerus, okay, we've got the radius, the ulna there. Now, let's say you want to extend or flex this particular part of the hand, okay? So this part on the shoulder there, we're saying that we've got what we call tendons. Remember, tendons are the ones that are connecting this particular muscle to the what? To the bone. So we've got the tendons on the long head here. These are tendons. Then this is the muscle. Specifically, we're calling them the biceps brachii muscle. The biceps brachii muscles, those that go for gym, they usually, abuse these muscles very much. So the brachii, the biceps brachii muscle. And then there's also what we call the insertion point. So this point that is here, okay, on the shoulder, is going to be our what? You can see here, it's going to be the origin of the brachii biceps. So this part is the origin. It simply means this part will not be moving. Then this part here, where there is this insertion, where this particular muscle of the brachii, biceps brachii is inserting itself, we call it the insertion point. So as you want to extend or flex your hand, this is the part that will be moving. You can even try it out. You find that your shoulder is going to be stable because that is where there is the insertion of this brachii muscle. As you are extending or flexing your hand, you find that this point is the one that is what moving. So we call it the insertion end. So the part of the muscle that is not moving, we call it the origin. That part which is moving, we call it the insertion point. So this is what I wanted you to know in this part 1 of this particular muscular system. Next time, we're going to look at part 2 and continue on what you must know on this particular system, and we talk about how muscles are innervated, their actions, how they cover different organs and their function and everything. We're going to cover that. For now, we're going to end here. Do not forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more upcoming videos. Okay.